"Hey, let's get out of here," he said, kneeling in front of her as if he were leaving the whole world behind, just to listen to the silence of a child. Emily barely looked up. She was dirty, curled up on the subway steps, holding a worn-out teddy bear like it was her only chance to survive the city. Richard Carter, the CEO known for his ruthless coldness, stopped for the first time in years. There, between the sound of the tracks and the hurried footsteps of the crowd, destiny spoke louder than any boardroom meeting, and it all began with a simple sentence that would change absolutely everything. If stories like this touch your heart, like the video, subscribe and share it, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The metallic screech of the subway echoed off the tiled walls like a warning no one ever heard. Richard Carter walked fast, his polished shoes clicking against concrete, tailored coat brushing past strangers. He wasn't the kind of man who stopped, not for delays, not for people, not for anything. But today, something caught his eye and refused to let go. At the bottom of the station stairs, curled up like something forgotten, was a little girl, 6, maybe 7. Her hair clung to her cheeks, damp from the cold. Her arms were wrapped around a worn-out teddy bear with one button eye missing. She wasn't crying. That would have been easier to ignore. But her silence screamed louder than any tears. He hesitated. That never happened. Richard Carter never hesitated. But there he was, mid-step, breath caught, heart doing something unfamiliar in his chest. The girl's eyes met his, brown, wide, not begging, just hollow. And for a second, time folded in on itself. He walked toward her, slowly, carefully. The station pulsed around him, trains rushing, people shoving past, phones ringing, but none of it seemed real anymore. Only her. She didn't flinch when he knelt in front of her. She just clutched her bear tighter. "Hey," he said softly, almost ashamed of his voice. "Let's get out of here." Her head tilted. No words, just a blink, as if trying to decide whether he was another adult who would leave or someone who might actually stay. Then, with a slow, fragile nod, she reached for his hand. Richard stood up, holding her small fingers like they were made of porcelain. He looked around. No one had noticed. No one cared. She could have been there for hours, or days, forgotten by a city that never looks down. He guided her up the steps, shielding her from the wind with his coat. She never said a word, but she didn't let go. And he didn't ask why she was there. Not yet. Not when just walking away had already unraveled something inside him. At the exit, he paused. Something in his gut twisted. This wasn't just a girl on subway stairs. This was something else. A memory? A message? He didn't know, but he felt it. Deep, sharp, real, like fate brushing its hand against the back of his neck. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story. But as they disappeared into the chaos above ground, Richard Carter, man of order, structure, control, had no idea he had just walked into the most life-changing story of his entire existence. Her name was Emily. She whispered it hours later, wrapped in a hotel blanket that still smelled like bleach and unfamiliar kindness. She didn't ask questions, just watched cartoons on mute and held her bear like it held her memories. Richard sat across the room, untouched glass of water in his hand, wondering why her name echoed louder in his chest than any stock market alarm. Emily had run away, not from a home, but from the absence of one. The orphanage was cold, she said. The food was grey. The people didn't look at you unless you screamed, but she wasn't screaming for help. She was searching for someone she remembered better than any bedtime story, her brother, Noah. Richard's throat tightened at the name. He didn't know why at first, but it lingered, like a word from a dream you try to grasp the second you wake. Noah, her only family, the only person who ever called her my sunshine, and meant it, the one who gave her the bear, the one who promised he'd come back, but never did. He disappeared years ago, Emily said. She waited, every birthday, every Christmas, every thunderstorm, until something inside her cracked, and she decided to find him herself. No plan, no bag, just the bear, her hope, and a map drawn in crayon. Richard listened quietly. He wasn't good at this. Emotions, comfort, softness. In his world, you solved things with money and deadlines, but this wasn't solvable. Not like a balance sheet or a merger. This was a child trying to glue herself back together with nothing but memory. He looked at her and realized something terrifying. He had no idea how to help. Not really. He could book rooms and call lawyers. But how do you give someone back their lost person? How do you fix something you didn't even know was broken? Still, something about her felt familiar. That gaze, that quiet defiance. He'd seen it before, he was sure of it. But where? In a boardroom, on a resume, or in someone he'd once overlooked long before his heart turned to steel? That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in the armchair while Emily dozed, murmuring Noah's name in her dreams. Richard's mind wandered to a face he'd tried to forget. Young, earnest, nervous. A former intern. Noah. A mistake. A dismissal. A file buried too deep. Suddenly, the pieces started shifting. And Richard Carter, the man with answers to everything, felt a shiver run down his spine. What if the boy she was looking for was a ghost from his own past? Richard Carter wasn't built for soft moments. He was built for boardrooms and bloodless deals, for 5-second decisions that moved millions. His face had graced magazine covers, always with a headline like "Cold, Brilliant, Unstoppable." He lived in glass towers, not on subway steps. And yet, there he was, staring at his own reflection in the dark hotel window, wondering who he had become. His schedule used to be sacred: breakfast with brokers, calls with overseas partners, lunches that cost more than some people made in a month. Now it was silent, cancelled, cleared, for a girl he barely knew. He should have felt reckless. Instead, he felt alive, and that scared him. Emily was asleep in the next room, curled up beside the bear. Richard had left the door open, as if afraid she'd vanish again. Something about her shook him, like she'd unlocked a room inside him that had been sealed for decades. He didn't understand it, he only knew he couldn't look away. That name, Noah, kept circling back like a storm. He remembered the intern, quiet, respectful, way too smart to be pushing papers. He remembered liking the kid, but then something happened. A system error, a financial misstep. Someone had to pay. And Noah was forgettable enough to disappear without a ripple. Richard's jaw clenched. The memory hit harder than he expected. He hadn't thought about that file in years. HR handled it. One signature done. He didn't even look the kid in the eye. But now he wondered if that decision had cost more than he could ever calculate. He poured himself a drink, then left it untouched again. His mind drifted to Emily's face when she said, "Noah never lies." It pierced through him, like a verdict. And in that moment, for the first time in his carefully built life, he felt something dangerous: doubt. What if she was right? What if Noah hadn't made the mistake? What if Richard had? And what if that single decision had shattered a family, not just a resume? His heart thudded against his ribs, unfamiliar with carrying this much weight. The next morning, while Emily colored on the hotel notepad, Richard searched the company's archived personnel records. He shouldn't have remembered the last name, but he did. Campbell, Noah Campbell. The file was thin. Termination. No follow-up. No second chance. Just gone. Richard stared at the screen and something deep inside him cracked. For a man who thought he had no regrets, this one was roaring back with a name, a face, and a little girl who trusted him without knowing the truth. Emily didn't talk much. Not in full sentences, anyway. She'd hum sometimes or whisper to her teddy bear when she thought Richard wasn't looking. Every night, she'd press the bear close to her chest, whisper, "Don't forget me," then fall asleep, facing the wall. She never asked for stories. She never cried. But the silence screamed everything she couldn't say. Richard tried, awkwardly. He bought coloring books, hot chocolate, even a tiny music box that played a lullaby he didn't recognize. But connection wasn't something he was trained for. He could read annual reports in 5 languages, but not the eyes of a 6-year-old girl who'd seen too much of the world already. He'd ask, "What do you like to do?" She'd shrug. He'd ask, "Do you want to go somewhere fun?" She'd nod, but only if she could bring the bear. Each answer chipped away at the illusion that this was temporary. She didn't behave like a runaway. She behaved like someone who had no one left to run to. Across town, in a dimly lit garage, Noah Campbell rubbed grease from his arms and stared at the closed bay doors. The world had taught him early that doors didn't open for people like him, not unless you forced them, and even then, they slammed shut just as fast. He'd lost jobs, housing, even friends after that mysterious incident at the firm. But the worst loss was Emily. He had left her with relatives who swore they'd care. He'd been wrong. He thought about her every day. He sent letters to the orphanage, no replies. When he finally saved enough to visit, they told him she'd been moved. That was 2 years ago. Since then, she'd become a ghost he chased in dreams, and blamed himself for every night. Back at the hotel, Emily watched Richard from behind the couch. She didn't fully trust him, not yet. But something in his voice, like cracked glass, not polished steel, told her he might not leave. Not today, at least. Richard, meanwhile, was unraveling. The deeper he dug into Noah's file, the more he realized how little he'd cared back then. One signature had ended everything. And now that same mistake stared back at him in the form of a child who didn't even know how much had been taken from her. And yet, even in that quiet, broken hotel room, something began to stir. 2 people, one too old to believe in healing, the other too young to give up on it, sat on opposite sides of the room, separated by pain, but slowly circling a trust neither of them had ever really known. For the first time in over a decade, Richard Carter cleared his entire schedule. No meetings, no press calls, no market briefings. His assistant panicked. The board was stunned, but he didn't care. He turned off his phone, closed his laptop, and sat cross-legged on the hotel floor beside a child with tangled hair and a bear missing an eye. Emily handed him a crayon. "Draw with me," she said. Richard stared at it like it was a foreign object, but he took it. Her drawing was of stars, a big one, a little one, holding hands. He didn't know how to color, not really, but he tried. And when he scribbled outside the lines, Emily giggled, genuinely. For a man who hadn't heard real laughter in his penthouse in years, that sound cracked through him like thunder in a desert. Later that night, after Emily fell asleep with marker stains on her fingers, Richard sat alone and reopened the file. He dug deeper this time, through archived emails, old security logs, names of those who were involved in Noah's dismissal. And then he found it. The error wasn't Noah's. It was someone else's, a junior exec who blamed it on the quiet intern, with no connections. His chest tightened. The shame didn't come as a whisper. It screamed. Noah had thanked him when he was fired. "Thank you for the opportunity, sir," the young man had said, eyes wet, voice steady, and Richard had nodded, thinking himself merciful. He closed the laptop and pressed his palms to his eyes. The realization burned. Emily wasn't just any child. She was a consequence, a walking reminder of what happened when power met indifference. And Richard, he was both. The next morning, Emily tugged at his sleeve. "Do you know where my brother is?" He hesitated. "Not yet," he said. "But I think I might have once known him." And that was the moment he decided he couldn't fix the past, but he could try to face it, even if it shattered the illusion of the man he thought he had to be. The days blurred together in soft moments, markers on hotel walls, quiet breakfasts with mismatched cereal bowls, and bedtime routines that didn't quite make sense but made Emily smile. She had started calling him Mr. Grumpy whenever he raised an eyebrow. He never corrected her. In fact, the nickname felt earned. They drew a lot, mostly stars, sometimes animals that looked suspiciously like boardroom executives. Once she drew a rocket ship and said, "This planet, nobody ever leaves their sister behind." Richard swallowed hard and didn't speak for a long time after that. He found himself lingering in her stories, tales of distant planets, brothers who built pillow forts, bears that protected you from nightmares. Most of it was fantasy, but some of it sounded real, especially the way she said Noah's name, with reverence, with belief, with unshakable loyalty. During her naps, Richard worked in silence. His penthouse remained empty while he scoured old files, made quiet calls, and tracked former interns who had vanished from the system. He even visited an old HR rep who barely remembered Noah Campbell. "Smart kid," she'd said. "Quiet, didn't fight it. That's probably why no one noticed when he left." That haunted Richard more than he expected. Noah hadn't even raised his voice. He'd just disappeared, like he knew it was pointless to speak up, like he was used to not being seen. And now, years later, the only person who remembered him fiercely was a 6-year-old with eyes full of stars and a voice full of hope. One afternoon, while Emily was in the bath, Richard found a paper she'd hidden under the bed. It was a drawing, her, Noah, and him. They were holding hands under a sky with 1,000,000 stars. At the bottom, she'd written in crooked letters, "My family if they find each other." He sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it for a long time. He had billions in assets, his name etched on towers, but this little girl had just drawn him into a universe where love wasn't bought, it was chosen. The next day, he took her to a park outside the city. She ran through leaves, her laughter echoing through the trees. For a second, he wondered what life might have looked like if he'd made different choices, if he hadn't been too blind to see the damage behind his decisions. That night, while she slept with her bear pressed against her chest, Richard whispered into the dark, "I'm going to find him, Emily. I promise you, I won't stop until I do." The truth didn't arrive like thunder. It came in quiet pieces, emails, voice messages, time-stamps. Richard had traced the paper trail to its bitter end, and there it was, undeniable. Noah Campbell had been innocent. The mistake was someone else's. But Noah had no last name that mattered, no mentor to defend him. Just a quiet presence and the wrong skin in the wrong room. Richard stared at the printed report, hands trembling. His signature was there, crisp, final, no notes, no questions. He had ended that young man's future like it was nothing more than a policy. He thought of all the times he'd fired people, thinking of them as errors, not lives. But this one had a face. And now, a little sister. That evening he didn't eat. He didn't speak. He just sat in the corner of the suite as Emily played quietly, her teddy bear tucked in her arm. She looked up and said, "Did you find him yet?" Her voice was hopeful, so full of trust it broke him. He couldn't lie. "I think I did," he whispered. "But I might have hurt him a long time ago." Emily tilted her head, confused. "You hurt Noah." Richard nodded, swallowing the ache in his throat. "Not on purpose, but I made a mistake, a big one, and it changed everything." She stood slowly, walked to him, and placed her tiny hand on his knee. He never stopped believing in people. He used to say, "Even when they break you, you don't stop hoping. That's what makes you stronger than them." Her words felt like glass in his chest. Emily didn't know the full story, not yet, but somehow she understood the weight of it better than he ever had. And in that moment, Her innocence wasn't just beautiful, it was convicting. Richard finally let the tears fall, not loudly. Just a silent stream down a face that had mastered masks. Emily climbed onto the couch beside him, resting her head on his arm. No blame, no judgment, just quiet presence. And in that silence, Richard realized that knowing the truth wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of what he needed to do. Because some things break you, but others force you to become someone worth rebuilding. The garage smelled like oil, rust, and sweat, life markers that Noah had come to accept as permanent. He wiped his hands on a dirty rag, unaware that fate was pulling into the lot behind him. The man stepping out of the sleek black car didn't belong there. Too polished, too tall, too clean. And yet, Noah recognized him instantly. Richard Carter stood still for a second, letting the weight of the place settle on him. Then, slowly, he walked toward the man whose life he had helped derail. "Noah Campbell," he said, voice low, cracking. "I came to say, I'm sorry." Noah didn't move, just stared. "You remember my name now?" Richard nodded, shame coating his voice. "I should have remembered it the day I erased it." Noah laughed once, sharp and bitter. "You don't get to come here and pretend to care. That file you signed, it cost me everything. My job, my home, my sister." "I know," Richard said, "and if I could undo it, I would. But all I have now is a chance to own what I did." He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. It was Emily's drawing. "She never stopped looking for you." Noah's breath caught. His eyes flicked to the paper, then to the car, and that's when he saw her. Emily, standing just behind the passenger door, clutching her bear, peeking out with tears already welling. She ran, not a single word. Just ran, feet pounding pavement, arms wide, sob stuck in her throat. And when she reached him, Noah dropped to his knees and held her like the world might shatter if he let go. "You found me," he whispered, broken. Richard turned away, unable to handle the intensity of the moment, but not out of shame, out of reverence. Because in that cracked parking lot, two people found something stronger than blood. Forgiveness. Noah looked up, Emily still in his arms. His expression wasn't grateful, it wasn't warm, but it wasn't closed either. It was cautious, watching, measuring, as if saying, "You don't fix this with words. You fix it with who you choose to become next." Noah didn't invite Richard inside. He just sat on a workbench, Emily curled against his side, like she was afraid if she blinked he'd vanish again. Richard remained standing, unsure whether to speak or let the silence breathe. The air smelled of gasoline and unfinished dreams. "I wasn't angry at first," Noah said finally, his voice low, steady. "I thought maybe I deserved it. Maybe I missed something. But then I started losing everything, my apartment, my savings, even Emily." He looked down at her and kissed the top of her head. "I left her with our aunt because I thought she'd be safer. But she was cruel. I didn't know. When I came back, Emily was already gone." Richard closed his eyes, the guilt thickening. "I never meant to." "But you did," Noah cut in. "You let your company swallow people like me, quiet ones, ones without lawyers or last names on buildings, and you never looked back." Richard nodded. There was no defense for what he had done. But then Noah reached into his toolbox and pulled out a rolled blueprint, stained and torn. "Recognize this?" he asked, tossing it toward him. Richard unraveled the paper. It was a site plan. One of his firm's largest upcoming projects, luxury condos scheduled to replace an aging orphanage. His orphanage, Emily's orphanage. "That's where she lived, where I thought she'd be safe," Noah said. "And your company's planning to bulldoze it next month." "You really didn't know, did you?" Richard felt the floor drop out from under him. He shook his head. "No, I didn't." But ignorance was no longer an excuse. Noah stood slowly, eyes like iron. "You already took my future once. I won't let you take hers too. And in that moment, Richard understood. This wasn't just about an apology. This was about justice, redemption, and rewriting the legacy of a man who thought he had it all until a girl on subway stairs showed him what really mattered. Richard Carter had faced hostile takeovers, legal battles, economic crashes, but none of it compared to the meeting he walked into that morning. 12 board members, dozens of shareholders, and a billion-dollar project on the line, all staring at him like he'd lost his mind. "I'm halting the development," he said, voice calm but unshakable. "Effective immediately, the land will be repurposed as a community center for children, for families, for second chances." Silence. Then murmurs. Then chaos. "You can't be serious. This will cost us everything. You're destroying your own legacy." Richard looked at them and, for the first time, didn't flinch. Then maybe it was never a legacy worth leaving. Back in the hotel suite, Emily sat beside Noah, coloring quietly while the news played on TV. "Carter Global halts billion-dollar construction after executive order from CEO," the anchor announced. Noah stared at the screen, jaw tight. He didn't know if he believed in gestures, but this one was loud. That afternoon, Richard stepped into the orphanage alone. It was crumbling at the edges, paint peeling, windows cracked, but still filled with life. He walked through the halls like a man visiting his own crime scene. In one room, faded names were scratched into the wall. One of them was Emily's. He stayed for hours, meeting staff, listening to stories. For once, he wasn't there to impress or command. He was there to listen. And when he left with a plan, a blueprint, one that didn't end in concrete but in kindness. Later, as he met with city officials and funders, he said something that surprised even him. "Words don't heal old wounds, but action can stitch back what we once believed was lost." It didn't fix everything. Noah still kept his distance. Trust wasn't something you built with a speech, but he watched. And that mattered, because Richard wasn't just making promises. He was finally showing up. And in doing so, he was slowly becoming someone new, not the man who built empires, but the one who rebuilt what his own hands had once torn apart. Richard sold 1/3 of his company the following week, not out of obligation, but because he didn't want that version of himself anymore, the one who measured life by profits and losses. He wanted fewer zeros in his account and more meaning in his days. That was a trade he could finally live with. He launched a foundation in the name of Noah and Emily Campbell, a quiet move, but intentional. It wasn't about headlines. It was about redemption, real, slow, imperfect. He started showing up at shelters, reading to children, listening to stories that once would have bounced off his cold exterior. Now they cracked him open. Emily flourished. Her laugh came faster now, her eyes brighter. She called Richard grumpy less often, and sometimes just Richard. Occasionally even kind of okay. It was the highest praise he'd ever received. Noah, still guarded, accepted a job at the foundation, working with teens aging out of the foster system. He didn't smile much, but he showed up every morning. And sometimes, when Emily tugged his arm and said, "Look, he's here again," he allowed the corners of his mouth to curve just a little. They found a house, modest, warm, with 3 bedrooms, chipped tiles, and a garden Emily swore would grow strawberries one day. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And for Richard, it was the first time a front door felt like home instead of a transaction. One night, after dinner, they sat on the porch, Emily on Noah's lap, Richard in the chair beside them. Fireflies blinked across the yard. "Do you think stars miss us when it's cloudy?" she asked. Noah chuckled. "I think they wait." And Richard, staring into the night sky, whispered, "Like some of us had to." He didn't ask for forgiveness anymore. He didn't need words. Every nail hammered into a new wall, every story shared, every meal served at the center. That was the language he spoke now. One of presence, one of quiet change. He wasn't trying to erase who he had been. He was learning to carry it differently, like a scar that doesn't fade, but stops bleeding. And in that, he found something he'd never bought, negotiated, or owned: peace. Because sometimes rebirth doesn't come with fanfare. It comes in the form of a little girl handing you a drawing and saying, "You're in this one too. This time I kept you close." It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that smelled like cookies in the oven and sounded like soft laughter echoing down the hall. Richard sat at the kitchen table, flipping through mail he no longer dreaded. Emily walked in with a folded paper behind her back, smiling like she had a secret too big to keep. "Close your eyes," she giggled. He obeyed, smiling. "Okay, now open." It was a drawing, crayon bright and full of stars. In the middle, 3 people stood hand in hand: Emily, Noah, and Richard. Above them, in her careful handwriting, it said, "My real family." But what broke him wasn't the words. It was the tiny heart she'd drawn next to his name. Richard couldn't speak. His throat tightened. He looked at her, blinking fast, and whispered, "Why am I in the middle?" "Because you're the one who helped us find each other," she said, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "And because you stayed." Noah watched from the doorway. He didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. He'd seen the change in Richard, not in the grand gestures, but in the small ones, the early mornings, the whispered bedtime stories, the way he always showed up. Later that night, as stars filled the sky and the house drifted into sleep, Richard stood by Emily's door, watching her breathe. He didn't feel like a CEO, or a hero, or even a man who deserved this. He just felt full, like something inside him had been empty for so long, and now it overflowed. He stepped outside, barefoot on the porch, feeling the cool earth under him. And for the first time in a long, long time, Richard Carter didn't dream of success or redemption. He dreamed of strawberry plants, of tiny drawings, of second chances. He dreamed of love, and finally he understood it. Have you ever helped someone like this, or been helped when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. See you in the next video. And in the next episode, you'll meet someone who had to choose between forgiveness or disappearing forever.